Hello everybody and welcome back. Now today's video, now that we finished talking about the domestic, economic, political, social, and cultural policies, we need to talk about the aims and results of policies towards women. So, just as a reminder, aims is all about the overall goal, results is the outcome of the effect, and women is the topic of today. I don't need to explain that. So, there are three policies we're going to be going over today. The first is impact of Sangan, then it's Mao's changes, and then it's the traditional prejudices against women. As we're going to see, a lot of what Mao is fighting against is how the institutions of China prior to him coming into power is what he has to fight against the most. And that is where we get to Sangan. Now, Sangan is pre-Mao. It is the institutional structure that relegated women to specific duties and roles in societies that they had a specific place, that they had a specific way to conduct themselves. All of this comes down to ancient Chinese customs of Confucianism. The concept that came out from about 400 BCE. So for the past 3,000 years, give or take. So Sangan was loyalty to ministers and officials to the empire, that no matter what, you have your loyalty to your country, period. Then you had the respect of your children and their parents. So you not only needed to be loyal to every member of the government, but you need to be respectful to not only parents, but of children as well. That as a woman, you need to be respectful, and although in charge of teaching kids, you need to be able to understand that when they grow up to a certain age, you're going to be beneath them. And the last one was obedience to their husbands. That you had to have all obedience after children, after the government, to your husband. That is it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so all of this was deeply rooted in the absolute suppression of women's rights. It was this concept of you are less than everything. You are one of the lowest members of society. That the lower you are on the economic aspect of society, the worse you had it. So a rich woman, for instance, could benefit from her husband's privilege and be treated better than a peasant woman. But both of them were still treated worse than men of the lowest standards. And this tradition was the one thing that Mao wanted to overthrow the most. Mao hated Sangan because it also conflicted with communism, which preaches that everyone is equal, as we've talked about. So when Mao is coming into power, he is first addressing all of these issues. He is first addressing exactly what these things are, which is why we need to understand what Sangan was to understand how Mao wanted to change society. So before Mao came into power, he started changing society under his communist political parties and groupings. But when he came into power, as we talked about earlier in the 1954 Constitution, he implemented the marriage law, which essentially legitimized women's rights, not only politically, but also socially, culturally, and essentially was Mao's attempt to fully remove Sangan. This is why we see that concubines was now completely forbidden. You couldn't have a mistress outside your wife. Arranged marriages, gone. Goodbye, buddy. Women who were forced to be married could now freely divorce. And if you weren't forced to be married, you can still freely divorce. And lastly, all marriages had to be recorded and registered. So for whatever reason, if you were forced into your marriage and your husband was keeping you from uh, going out to divorce him, the fact that the government would come around and try to take a record was your moment of opportunity to say, hey, no, this isn't, I'm not, no, we're not married. He forced me to do this. So, in the first time in Chinese history, were women given fully equal rights. And between 54 and 58, women start rising and joining the military. They start joining political movements. They start trying to join the government. And all of that changes in 1958. Because in 1958, Mao conducts the Great Leap Forward. And in this Great Leap Forward, Mao conducts collectivization, which was the picking up and removing of peasant populations all across China and relocating them to one solid area. Well, what's interesting about collectivization was women were also recruited to work in fields and factories and be in the military because they were equal. They had to pull their own weight. And so because of that, during the Great Leap Forward, there was a weird shift of improvement in women's rights because Mao had no time. The government did not want to deal with conflicting issues between those who still wanted Sun Gan and the women who were fighting against it. So during collectivization, all of the women were in one housing unit and all of the men were in another housing unit. And they would only be able to interact with each other, only be able to engage with each other for food or during food and sometimes for conjugal visits, for visits where they could have and practice sex. And a lot of this collectivization broke a lot of the norms and broke a lot of the fallacies that people have on the fact that women are not as strong as men. This shows, they actively are. They are, and in some cases, possibly stronger than certain men. That they are in the fields, tilling, working, and tearing up the ground. They are working, and they're giving it as much as they possibly can because, unfortunately, they have to prove that they are better than men because men are not willing to see the obvious. So, this showed a huge swing in the positive direction for women. But in spite of this, in spite of the government pushing equal rights, in spite of women working incredibly hard to prove their worth and their value, there was still prejudice. And so women had to face and suffer between 49 and 76 because Mao comes into power in 49 and dies in 1976. That during this time period, the government, apart from struggling with every policy we've gone over thus far, they still had to fight against traditionalists who would argue, no, these women should not have equal rights. We should not be doing that. This is a bad thing in society. And so the government was constantly struggling with trying to push people and say, like, it doesn't matter what you think, this is what's happening. But this traditional prejudice was present even within the government. Despite the fact that Mao's wife held one of the strongest positions of political power, they were not walking the walk. They were not having women in higher ranking governmental positions. They were not allowing women to advance very high in the military. And when a woman did, it was under very specific circumstances and wasn't exactly true to what Mao was pushing. So a lot of what Mao argued for his communism wasn't even practiced by his own government in giving women equality. That a lot of the attempts to break the tradition hurt women because even though all of these laws were put in place, even though there was now status for them to be protected, the government never followed through. So it doesn't matter that you have these laws if no one is enforcing them. It doesn't matter that women are doing all of this hard work to show just how equal and in some cases better it didn't matter because there wasn't enough. And so it's interesting to really think about it, because in Mao's China, there is a massive advancement for women. But when you compare that advancement to like here in the United States, it's kind of on par. That sure, women got rights and voting and all of these laws faster than in the United States in some cases. They were still not given that true equality that Mao kept preaching in his communism. So this is an interesting juxtaposition to Hitler, who removed rights from women. And I would thoroughly encourage you to go back and rewatch that video with this now fresh in your mind to make effective comparisons.